Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I am a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University and associate lecturer at the Open University and an independent writer, speaker and consultant with critical early years. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting Oracy in primary and early year settings, inspiring you with guidance to enhance your practice. Now, this week, I'm delighted to introduce Michael Gardner as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. How are you today?
I'm really good, thank you, Shaddai. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm looking forward to getting into this, hopefully really generative conversation. But before we do, perhaps you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder of the Oracy Shift, where we're on a mission to put Oracy really into the nuts and bolts of what we do in education. And in my day job, I'm teaching and learning lead at the Maritime Academy Trust, which is spread across South East London and into Kent, and that's 13 primary schools. And I lead our ECT program. I run our CPD pathways with our more experienced teachers, looking at a range of pedagogy and practice. And I do lots of work in schools from nursery up to year 6, working with our teachers, subject leaders, senior leaders on what they're doing in the classroom.
Excellent. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about Oracy and Wellbeing in primary schools and earlier settings. First question I'd like to ask you then, Mike, is how do you see Oracy as supporting children's self-efficacy and emotional regulation skills?
So I think when we think of self-efficacy, we're thinking about that belief in themselves that they can achieve and they can go and do things. And this starts right from when we look at our youngest children, our 3 and 4 year olds, all the way up through the school. Self-efficacy does many things with language. So if you have the language, you're more willing to engage, whether it's class discussions, whether it's with interactions with other children, answering questions. So you feel a sort of sense of, I'm contributing something to this class discussion, and you can get that feedback and that response and that link with the adult, which adds a lot to your confidence boost going forward. Those connections with your peers as well, it really helps having language to be able to make friends, to maintain healthy relationships. And having worked in nursery, you see it a lot with our 3-year-olds, especially post-pandemic, who they just don't know. They play on their own or alongside other children, and you start to see them interacting and trying to figure each other out. And while a lot of that is non-verbal cues, there's a lot of verbal dialogue, and they need to learn how to do that. And I think also taking on risks and taking chances in the classroom. We're always trying to say, especially in primary, that failure, fail is the first attempt in learning. Children with the language may be more confident because they can ask questions or they can understand what they're not doing right, and they can reflect on it and try again and feel like they're supported. But if they don't have that, maybe they feel a bit more unsure and they're just going to disengage because actually I don't want to fail because I can't express myself. In terms of sort of that emotional regulation, if I take it back to early years and to EYFS, it's really important when your adults are in there to think about those social situations that you can set up and foster for children to rehearse, whether it's through Small World or puppets or role play, and with the adults being a really good role model in that and learning how to regulate their emotions and how to be empathetic and how to talk to each other in a kind and positive way. One of the things to do with that, and I'm sure some of our listeners would have seen that emotions wheel, and we, especially with our younger children, always trying to get them to recognize emotions. And you see it, they always talk about happy and sad, scared, and they're the primary emotions. They're the ones they see straight away. But trying to get them onto those sort of secondary emotions and understanding what's driving that. A child who's happy might be calm. They might be excited. They might be content. and the way you interact with that child can be very different based on where they're at. A calm child might be happy and wants to be left alone. But a child who's really excited might want to talk to someone about what they're feeling and what they're excited about. So sometimes it's hard for those children to express their emotions so that other people can relate to them and then help them if they need help. So Oracy plays a massive part in self-efficacy and emotional regulation, because without words, people can't sort of understand where their own mind is at and help others with it.
Effectively, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the characteristics of effective learning that we have within the early years, which is effectively the how of children's learning rather than the what in terms of the content, which for me, as you say, is so important in terms of the ways in which they can come to develop a love for schooling and that ability to form friendships with others and be in that safe, supportive environment. I guess at the same time, a lot of this is linked fundamentally to children's identity, isn't it? And their overall confidence. So could you just speak a little bit more about children's identity and that link to Oracy there?
Yeah, so I think I've done a lot of research recently, and you will see, if you know anything about Oracy, there's lots of reports and frameworks that have come out in the last few years. One that I'd go back to a few years ago, there was an all-party parliamentary group on Oracy in Parliament, which sort of looked across the country and looked at where are we falling down, where are we behind with our Oracy work. And what it picks up on is that sense of belonging. And Oracy and language acquisition gives you that sense of belonging, because you have the words, you have the jargon, you understand where people from within your community are coming from. And lots of disadvantaged children, they lack that sense of belonging because they don't have the words to engage with their peers. And this can, disenfranchise them or make them feel isolated and not part of a group. And that can only escalate if it's not addressed into secondary and into adulthood. So we really want, children, there's this sense of social connectedness. Children should be going to school. They should be able to interact. They shouldn't be left out. And sometimes in the schools that I've been in, you get children new to the country. They don't have the language or any of the words to go and play with other children because they just can't say it. And sometimes some really, really able, socially aware children will engage with them and bring them into their group, but sometimes it just doesn't work. Imagine putting yourself into a country where you didn't speak the language. You wouldn't know what to do. So we as adults need to help foster those positive relationships and give them the words to engage and feel that they're part of something bigger than just me or myself.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of connection you're making there, beyond identities, the kind of broader social fabric that we have within communities and the need for us as teachers to support children's Oracy and literacy skills to be able to feel part of that community. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the example you gave around a child coming to this country whose first language was not perhaps English is a really important one when we think about that connection to equality. But there's also a gendered aspect to this as well, in terms of boys' development, in terms of their Oracy skills and girls' development. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. Yeah,
so originally I'm Key Stage 2 experience, so, our 9, 10, 11-year-olds, where I think the difference is they're changing and becoming teenagers as they leave us and go to secondary. But when I think more about going down to the earlier years, and especially when you're seeing our youngest learners, our 3 and 4-year-olds, you can really start to see a slight difference in those the gender split. Girls, often will come in and they're part of the way they play is that social interaction, that role playing, that learning to communicate with each other. And boys, not always, but there's a lot more physicality to it, and those gross motor skills and wanting to go and play and explore and use the body in different ways, which are perfectly natural and fine, but it does present challenges, especially since the pandemic, for some of our children to learn how to engage and where language is going to help them along that way. So yeah, I think also in class, it sort of plays to that point of the more confident child is going to get picked more to do things, or is going to be asked the questions more. And I think there's some research I read about recently where they tracked the gaze of the teacher in the class using some special cameras. And then they fed back to the teacher and said, did you know you spent 50% of your time on one table? And that table over there at the back, they weren't even picked up on. So even beyond gender, I think teachers sometimes do your unconscious bias around, I'm going to engage with a group that really can converse with me and give me the answers because it's easier. And it feels like if I do that conversation, the other people will just absorb it. Actually, learning needs everyone to contribute. Not necessarily at the same level, but everyone needs to have a voice, and you need to make sure no one is sort of left out of that process. So that research, I think, sort of highlights, be very aware. Am I opening up the talk, or am I just cherry picking what's easier for me? Yeah, so it's a challenge. It's a real skill for a teacher to do that alongside all of the other aspects they're doing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think it feeds into the discussions we have about enabling environments, but also the sorts of cultures we have within our classrooms that enable all children to feel like they have a voice to participate and belong within those environments. So yeah, that's a really interesting insight you just shared, Mike. I'm just interested in any more stories that you've got around particular children you've worked with in the past and how Oracy has been connected to their sense of identity and their overall learning and development.
Yeah, so I've got a couple that I'm thinking of. So I've got a child, it was a girl, new to the country, did speak English, but obviously it's a very unfamiliar place. It's a lot of alien concepts and, you know, that start of trying to form friendships and bonds, and the learning is almost secondary to that. It's about them feeling safe, and they're not going to learn until they can understand and feel that they're in a place that they belong. Some of the talk strategies that we were using across the whole class just didn't work for this child. They're not going to stand up or raise their hand because they physically don't have the words or the language for it. So then bringing in more of those table talk with a partner, maybe a partner who we know is really empathetic and is going to listen well to this child and give them the time and not dominate. So thinking really carefully about who they buddy up with. Over time and gradually building those relationships and that trust with the child in the class, they start to learn the language first of all, which helps. But then that also those small interactions on the table show them that they can interact. Even if it's at a very, very small level to begin with, they're starting to build that. And this child now has gone to secondary school and is a teenager, and they're vocal and their language has come along tremendously. So that gives me a great sense of satisfaction to see them progress like that. Another one I'm thinking of, sort of the opposite end, a child who English was their first language, but their oracy and their emotional regulation wasn't there. So they're in key stage 2, and every playtime is a very loose time for a lot of children. It can be quite scary, but where the adults are not there role modelling the language, sometimes those confrontations. I always go back to football. Football is always the reason for a lot of these sort of arguments or disagreements, and where a child, all they know is how to use their physicality to respond. They don't have the words or the ability to sort of calm themselves and take themselves away. So that, looking at that and then looking at what are the adults doing in that to model, but also what structure can we put in place? So can we change the games at playtime? Can we put in different opportunities for people to lead games and to follow rules and you know, help with that conflict resolution in a sort of more manageable way? And that really helped with that child because they realised, oh, it doesn't always have to go like this. There's ways I can get help, even outside of the classroom.
Yeah, both of those case studies are really interesting. And as I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting on the fact that our listeners themselves who are working with children will have their own case studies, and we'll probably have a number of children that come to mind when it comes to Oracy who might be struggling for whatever reason. So perhaps a key takeaway from this is that teachers themselves can reflect upon their own practical schooling context, the children that they're working with, and really think about what strategies and solutions can be put in place to make sure that child is having an equitable experience, is having that opportunity to participate and be able to share their voice in a way that's meaningful to them. So that's a great way to end the episode, and thank you so much, Mike.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest Mike for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Shaddai Tembo, and Mike Gardner. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.